Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with hosts Peter DeWitt and Michael Nelson. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter, Mike, and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure that every student is learning not by chance, but by design.
Michael, we have another episode of Leaders Coaching Leaders, and this one's a powerful one.
It is for sure. We've invited Tim Shriver, who's the editor of A Call to Unite and the author of Fully Alive, and has done so much with, as you know, Special Olympics, Peter.
So going into this conversation, we're both a little nervous. I mean, Tim Shriver is a very big deal, and he does so much profound work. What do you think our listeners will get from this interview?
Boy, that is a great question.
I pride myself on asking some really good ones.
Well, that's just who you are. There's many quotes that he shares that he has a way of putting words together into phrases that really resonate. And he talks about things that resonate not just in your mind and heart, but really at the soul level. He talks about, things at the soul level. And this podcast is a personal growth, but it's also a call to action. So, I mean, it's kind of this like, I'm personally impacted by the words that you're saying, but I can also see leading in a way in which he's speaking. And I love the phrase that he used, everyone is more beautiful than we dare imagine. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like, oh, he said that for me. I'm more beautiful than I dare imagine. But I can also see that phrase used as I'm a leader, I'm a school superintendent, I'm a principal, and with my students and staff, and everyone is more beautiful than I dare imagine. And those words speak at that level too. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think, before we jump into the interview, what we also want people to know is that he gives really practical guidance. It's not just sort of a lofty worldview. It's also the nitty-gritty of what can happen within schools and maybe the starting point for some of this work. And he uses some really key phrases about things like what dignity actually means. And I think people will get they're definitely going to get that shared understanding piece that we always want them to have, but they're also going to get practical tips from him as well. So we hope you enjoy this pretty wonderful interview with Tim Shriver.
Absolutely. It's going to be great.
Picture yourself popularly known among staff members as the reliable go-to person who makes meaningful change happen. This is possible when you equip yourself with robust strategies and tools from Corwin's leadership workshops. Sign up today at corwin.com.
All right. Today we're joined by Tim Shriver. Tim, welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. We are so glad that you're here today.
Thanks for having me. By implication, it sounds as though I'm a leader, so I'm flattered, but I'm a little intimidated by the title, and hope I can live up to it.
You can certainly live up to it. We were talking just a little bit before we pushed record, and there's just so many incredible experiences that you have had throughout your whole life, but just recently in the last 6 months or so. And we'd love to dive into that because I think many of our listeners may not know, but I'd love to start with maybe a first connection of where I first met you. I remember going to the AASA conference in Nashville, and you were the keynote speaker, and you had just published, edited the book, The Call to Unite. It was just an incredibly powerful book to me with excerpts of stories. And it was, written during the pandemic, and just so many incredible people. But I'd like to open just with your words that are in the forward, Tim, if you don't mind. So over the course of my life, I've seen again and again how people flourish when they unite and how they suffer when they're separated. I saw it when I taught high school, where membership in a club helped my students resist the allure of gangs. I've seen it in the movement for social and emotional learning, where kids who learn empathy give up bullying for belonging. I've seen it as chair of the Special Olympics, where athletes who have been isolated for their whole lives shine with joy when they come together. But the most striking lesson I've learned about belonging, I've learned from watching Special Olympic volunteers, including myself. Year after year, we come to help, we get humbled because we think we're coming to serve the broken people, and we are the ones who are made whole. I think those 2 paragraphs just I kept coming back to them, and as I think about the joy of having these 20, 25 minutes with you, Tim, the joy of you as a person, but the people listening are the leaders of education in the future. And this book came out during the pandemic, and I have so many questions around it, but my first is share a little bit about that quote, number 1, and then I have a perspective that I read the book during the pandemic and the passages that, of hope during that time. But when I reread it recently, I think it's a book post pandemic. You
Yeah.
can learn so much more,
Yeah.
even though it was written for a purpose after. So
Mm.
I'll just let you respond.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that piece. The words of in that essay. They were. I was trying to write there, Michael, about this issue that is, as you point out, post-pandemic. It's now cultural. It's this issue that we're so divided from one another, that we seem to be so different that we can't bridge the gap, that it looks like a bridge. It's just a bridge too far to find a way forward together for many people. And so this descent into kind of a certain loneliness, a certain anxiety about the future, a distrust of others, of institutions, of organizations, of groups, of people. It all seems inevitable to so many of us, and it isn't. It is not inevitable.
Mm,
And it partly is driven by the story we tell ourselves about each other. We say Republicans are so horrible, or Democrats are so horrible, or people who live in the South are so horrible, or people who live in the North, oh my God, that's the worst. Um, and the list goes on and on. Those people, and it's not true. So
mm,
many times our view of others has been distorted by the media, uh, by the news, by the algorithm, and we create this specter of another human being as being so distasteful or contemptuous that we can't get along. And what I found in Special Olympics, I mean, people don't automatically make the leap, but it's there. This is a population that was treated that way for centuries. They're just too different. You got to get rid of them. And all it has taken from most of us is just a meeting, just to see each other for a glimpse. It doesn't erase that you have Down syndrome and I don't, or that you have autism and I have something else, or that you have I mean, all those conditions can persist that make us different, but they do not have to contribute to hatred and contempt. They can actually awaken us to a deeper form of respect and dignity and even love. So the difference making, the leading us from difference to contempt is the problem. And the book, in so many ways, I was saying to you before we started, I just interviewed yesterday for my podcast for Need a Lift, which is all just profiles of people who look the face of pain and difference and find a way through it with hope and possibility. I was interviewing Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. She's a Zen priest and a social activist. And most people say, well, you have to be one or the other because a Zen priest just sits around doing Zen all day long and a social activist is out pounding the pavement. No, you don't have to do one or the other. And in the book, The Call to Unite, in the midst of the pandemic, her advice was take a moment to look up at the sky.
mm,
Uh, what she was trying to say in the book was take a breath, humanity. We're going to be okay. Even those of us who may suffer more or more deeply, we will find a way through if we have space within ourselves to see ourselves as part of this huge big narrative like the sky tells us we are. And that's what she was saying yesterday when I interviewed her, but with much more grit and toughness around how you can be both whole and peaceful and whole and a peacemaker, and at the same time challenge systems that don't work in ways that are full of love, not full of contempt, not full of anger. So, I think the prophet Isaiah is one of my favorite quotes in the Judeo-Christian canon. When the prophet writes about people being charitable, giving your cloak to those who need it and visiting those in prison and helping the sick and so on and so forth. At the end, the language is, you will be known as a healer of the breach. And I think that's the challenge of this moment. The superpower we need as leaders is to find ways to heal breaches because they're all around us. And if we don't heal them, I'm sorry to say, I don't think we make it.
You, thank you. And I'm going to get a little bit more personal than I expected to when we first started this podcast. So Michael and I write the Finding Common Ground blog for Education Week. So we're always looking at, we want to make sure that we're focusing on how we can come together as opposed to how we can rip each other apart.
Mm-hmm.
But even, in the past couple of years, I lost my mom and sister 4 months apart. And I have a couple of brothers that are on the other side of the political realm than I am. But I always feel I don't have the luxury to not talk to somebody because they have a different political view than me. What we have to start with is, how do we come together, and what are those things that we do have common ground on? What are those conversations that we can have? And these challenging conversations don't have to be difficult. We do it all the time when we're coaching leaders. It's, how do you start with difficult conversations and just make sure that you're asking the right questions, and you're trying to get the entry point into the conversation with what they're believing. And I know that listening is something that's really powerful for you. I want to go back to the Special Olympics piece, and I have to do a shout out because I have two very good friends. I live in upstate New York. I have two good friends, Peter Mesh and Peter Slattery. So yes, there are three Peters together. We make it easier for everybody to just know our names. But they are heavily involved with Special Olympics. They coach tennis. They're a part of the state. When everybody comes together across the state, and I've volunteered for tennis when the competitions have been in the area. And one of the questions I actually texted Peter this morning, said, I'm going to be talking to Tim Shriver today, so I need to know what is a good question. So I'm going to give him credit because it comes from Peter Mesh, but he said, how do unified sports and best buddies, how do these programs affect education for students, coaches, and a broader school community?
I'll try to answer that briefly, but first of all, let me say, extend to you what I'm sure a lot of listeners are feeling, which is our condolences for your loss. It's losing a sibling is brutal. I haven't had to do that, thank God. Losing a parent is brutal. Losing two at the same time, I can't imagine. So I'm extending to you the sympathies of all of us listening as you, I'm sure, continue to navigate that. Maybe the answer to best buddies or unified sports, which is Special Olympic sports where children with and without intellectual challenges are on the same team together. Maybe the answer is a little bit in your intro, Peter. These programs allow people to meet one another on common ground. I like to say the formula for the Special Olympics, which has been around for 60 or so years, depending on how you count, based on my mother's formula, was meet, play, celebrate, repeat. There's 50,000 Special Olympics games a year. They all have the same formula. People meet, they train or play, they compete, or use whichever word you like, and then they celebrate the good in each other. They don't meet and then make a list of all the ways in which they're different. They don't meet and do a diagnostic of their genetic or biological symptoms. They meet and they play. And after they play, they don't go, you suck, I'm good. They celebrate. I came in first. Yay. You came in second. Good for you. Did you do the best you could? Could you do better next time? Then let's do it again. This is a deceptively powerful formula for bridging divides, maybe within your own family. You don't have to meet your brothers, but maybe you do have to play a little bit
Mhm.
with your brothers, and whatever form that play might take. Joke telling, watching sports, playing charades, playing football. I don't know what it might be. It could be any number of different things. But the idea that we come together and then we enter into some kind of a relationship that brings us common ground, common experience. For kids, this is wildly natural. So kids join Best Buddies in third grade or sixth grade, or they play on a Special Olympics unified soccer team in third grade or eighth grade or 12th grade. You almost don't have to teach them. They know, well, I'm just going to play soccer, right? Everybody knows what to do. You don't use your hands. You kick the ball. You try to score a goal, or you run up and down the field. And before you know it, you've become a part of the other person's team, you know? And before you know it, you look over across and you don't see Peter DeWitt, the expert. You just see a fellow soccer player. You see a teammate.
Yeah.
And that seeds, like I think that settles into your consciousness, into our collective consciousness. You see that person as having that identity. And as one of our Special Olympics athletes said to me years ago, when I went to Special Olympics, I was no longer, and I'm going to use the language she used because it was a long time ago, I was no longer retarded. I was
Mm.
a runner.
Mm.
And we have a lot of conversations these days about identity. Like, what's your identity? What's my identity? They're in some ways healthy, in some ways complicated. But for someone who's had an identity that always pushed them out of the circle of belonging to get a new identity that centers them in the circle of aspiration and inspiration, it can be life changing. So for kids, we think this is critical, and we see gains in academic achievement when kids join unified sports. We see gains in attendance. We see gains in mental health status, because I think it liberates them to see themselves as part of the larger whole. And we all, like I said in the introduction that Michael read, we think, you say to fifth grade. I asked a fifth grader just a couple weeks ago who was a non-disabled person volunteering on a unified sports team and in gym class. He said, "Well," I said, "Why do you do this?" He said, "My mom told me I should." And then I said, "Well, what about you?" He says, "Oh, yeah, I like it a lot because I get to teach my friend," I think his name was Ralph. I get to teach Ralph how to play football. So if Ralph ever wants to play, he'll know how." And then I said, "And is there any, what have you learned from Ralph?" And he looked at me and he said, "Oh," he said, "I learned that we all need to help." He didn't say, "I learned I need to help."
Right.
He learned the lesson that everybody needs to be a helper.
Mm.
Fifth grade.
Yeah.
Now, if you ask me what he's gonna remember at 30, I think he's gonna remember what Ralph taught him, when some issue confronts him, and I think it's gonna make him a better math student and a better science student and a better citizen and a better kid and a happier human being.
Well, I think I have to agree with you on that one because, I'm a former teacher and school principal, and um, volunteering with Peter and Peter for the Special Olympics is just life changing
Yeah.
when you're there. So thank you for that.
I couldn't help but think of the word dignity as you walked your way through that. And,
Mhm.
in the first question, I heard you use the word contempt, and you and your colleagues have worked tirelessly on a new project in recent years called the Dignity Index.
Mhm.
And I think our listeners, our educational leaders who are tuned in, and other leaders who are tuning into this podcast, may or may not know about it, but it it really impacted me when I began to study those two words, contempt and index, or contempt and dignity, and the use of the word dignity. There's almost this calming sense every time I say it, and I have no idea why that is for me. But I would love to know a little bit more about that, the index, and
Yeah.
just the just that continuum, from contempt
Yeah.
to dignity.
Well, here's the couple of quick points. When we looked at the culture, at our broader culture surrounding our schools, we concluded, this is a few years ago, we did quite a big outreach and did a lot of polling, and we did a lot of visits, talked to a lot of kids, talked to a lot of politicians, and so on. Uh, our little team concluded that we don't have a difference of opinion problem, that we have a contempt problem. It's not that we differ. We do differ, and we always will differ, and we always have differed. Differing is not the problem. It's how we treat each other when we differ that has become a problem. So we refer to that as contempt. We treat each other with contempt when we disagree, which means at some level, we think they're less human than we are. We think those people are less than we are. And dignity is seeing in the other person the same as me. I see myself in you. Now, if that's the problem, if it's not that we differ on immigration policy or economic policy or tax policy, whatever it is, those things are important, don't get me wrong. But if those aren't the problem, the problem is when we disagree, we treat each other with contempt, then we've got a new issue. And that is, how do we reduce contempt and increase on the other end dignity? So we built a scoring tool so we could in a way frame the problem for people. You can see yourself from 1 to 8. It's an objective tool. You can score yourself. It's not actually very complicated. We thought at the beginning, oh, no one's going to accept that they're treating someone with dignity or with contempt. Actually, people own up to it pretty much right away. As soon as they see it, they see the language of a 2 is you're ruining everything and you're evil and I'm good. And they go, oh, yeah, I used that yesterday. Okay, that's a 2. And then they see themselves saying, well, I think Michael should have equal time. We don't agree on things, but give him equal time. Oh, that's a 5. Oh, yeah. Okay. I used a 5 when I was talking to him yesterday. So the scale allows us to see ourselves and to see others on a continuum from 1, which is you don't deserve to live, to 8, which is no matter what, I see myself in you. What's happened, Michael, is that teachers and school administrators, school board members have been one of our big audiences because they're trying to create dialogue at school board meetings that has dignity and respect as part of it. So you can use the index and say to people, hey, when you raise your hand and you want to talk to a school board member about a decision, use 5 and up language. And the person can look at it and go, well, what the hell is that? And they can look at it and go, oh, okay, I can disagree. I can be principled. I can be passionate, but I cannot use hatred and contempt towards you, the school board member. That's off limits. So it has become a tool for creating codes of conduct. Some teachers are teaching the scale in classrooms, and then using it, for instance, to help kids get into reading the speeches of great politicians or reading the characters in a short story. And when such and such talk, when Hamlet uses this language, or when Boo Radley doesn't say this or that or the other thing, how would you score his speech or their speech in the piece of literature? So it's moving into the classroom. This is being done by teachers, by the way. We don't have all the tools for teachers to do this. We're offering it to teachers and inviting them into a collaboration. But the exciting thing is that it has enabled conversations around the issue that we think is destroying us. And it invites people to recognize the problem of contempt, their role in it, but most importantly, their power to change it. Because so many people feel like, oh, what are we going to do? It's a hopeless case, right? The country's going to hell in a handbasket. I don't want to deal with those people, whatever we think those people are. My team lost, or my team won. My team won. We're going to crush them. My team lost. I'm going to give up. That cycle is, I would argue, not American. That's not who we are. That's not what's made this country good at the times when it's been good. And it's also not the quality that's gotten us through the times when we've failed each other. Giving up is not cynicism, and despair is not. This country doesn't work on those. I think contempt is at the heart of the cynicism and despair in the country and amongst many of our kids and our families. So we hope this little tool, it's a 1-pager. It's like, I know from being a teacher, you want me to read a book about how to teach something, forget it. I don't have time for that. But give me a 1-pager that I can introduce into my 3rd grade or my 6th grade or my 12th grade classroom. I'll take a look at that. And so teachers have been terrific, and schools are, I think, showing in baby steps now, but we hope in more aggressive implementation in the future, ways in which we can address some of the challenges our kids face and our communities face around this issue of treating each other a little bit better.
So I'd like to actually try to bring two things together. Hopefully, I'll be able to do it as I'm talking. So we know that over the years, the past few years especially, school administrators have really had to deal with a lot. I mean, so have teachers, but school administrators, district administrators, we know that we've constantly talked about principal attrition because of the political stuff that's going
Mhm.
on. And when we think about the fact that there are community members and family members that actually would be more likely to believe a news station than they would their administrator within their own school, like
Mhm.
that. You know, we a few years ago talking about critical race theory, and there were just people that, this is going on in the school when it wasn't happening in the way that they were thinking, but they were actually believing a national news station more than they're going to believe what's going on in their school, which is a problem, I think, for schools. And then we start thinking about things like shared understanding. That's something Mike and I talk about when it comes to dignity. What do you think? You said that this isn't necessarily, you don't have the tools yet for teachers, and I'm going to say the word yet, but what would be the first step for school administrators and district administrators who are feeling really overwhelmed by being in the middle of all this discourse when it sounds like the dignity index is a really great space to define that shared understanding? What would be the first step? And I know I'm making it really intentional here,
Yeah.
but we've worked with so many school leaders that just constantly struggle with, where do we start, where do we start, do we really need one more thing? We have so many initiatives, we're doing all these things.
Yeah.
Where is the place they could start where this works?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And as usual, I wish there was, like when it comes to what I would call the science of implementing anything in a school, it's complicated, but I'll try to make it as simple as I can. Uh, and I just got off a call yesterday, day before yesterday, with a superintendent in a Connecticut school district who wants to be the model district in this. So I'll tell you what he said. He said, the first thing I'm going to do, I said to him, you have so many initiatives. We don't want to add another initiative. He says, yeah, we're going to do an inventory and find out where this fits within the existing work we're doing. So the first thing, he was almost saying, I've done it or I will do it, is get an assessment of where you are now, what you've got that's working in this area, in the area of dignity and empathy, in the area of self-regulation, in the area of communication, relationship skills, all those things, all the SEL sort of frameworks. Find out what you've got that's closely aligned to this. And the reason you'd be asking that question is because maybe none of them yet highlights this one issue. And we think this one issue, treating each other with dignity, can become a lever that pulls or pushes all those other initiatives along. So find out where it might fit. Secondly, what he's going to do is he's going to appoint a group of teachers to work with us and get training. And training can be, an hour.
Mhm.
It can be half an hour or it can be 3 days, but it can be an hour. And you can learn quite a lot about how this works in an hour. He wants those 6 to 12 teachers, he hasn't decided, administrators, maybe a pupil personnel person also, to form a small committee that will look at an implementation next year in an elementary, a middle, and a high school. And he wants classroom implementation. He doesn't want just, planning or structures or policies or parents or he wants them to think about how dignity can become a part of the classroom culture in his school district. He's going to appoint a separate person to work with us on discipline and on peer mediation, restorative practices, and discipline, because he thinks that his administrators could use the dignity index to better dialogue with kids when kids have been found to violate a school norm that requires some kind of discipline. Uh, then there's going to be a third phase, which is going to focus on how do we get parents to become a part of this and how do we make this accessible to parents? Because it's no good to teach a third grader how to dialogue with dignity if the parent comes at home, the parent models a huge amount of contempt or anger or hostility towards the kid or towards anybody else for that matter. So it's not that we're telling people how to behave, it's just that we're giving them the tools to opt up. So that's how he's thinking about it. My own view on, when you want to change a school district or change a school or help a school or support a school and what it's trying to do is yes, it often starts top down. Get a principal, get a superintendent who cares. That makes it safe for everyone else. But the real change takes place when classroom teachers see value for their class, for their kids. And I think we can show value for this for almost any age group without a huge amount of disruption, without backbreaking levels of implementation and rigor, but with a kind of a guided support that just allows people to, as I say, it's almost as simple as saying, we have a new issue class. This year, second grade, I want you to know we have one belief in this class that I want you all to learn, and we're all going to try to model, and that is that when we disagree, we're going to treat each other with dignity. Now, does anybody know what dignity means? And then one hand goes up, no hands go up. Okay, let's write on the board what dignity means. And then let's get a definition for our class. I mean, I'm teaching it, but it's probably not what you want. But this is what
No, it
excites
is.
me.
We're former primary school teachers, so you are like speaking our language right now.
But it excites me. And then when you have circle and when you have literature or when you have a breakdown or when you have a bad day or when something happens and people are scared and they're scared and they think they want to blame someone, we can use this language as a way of incorporating your fears, your anger, your hostility into strategies that actually optimize the need to work through those things without resorting to dehumanizing contempt as the way to manage them. Does that make sense? I mean, this is all work in progress, so I just want to.
No, it's beautifully said. So thank you for that.
It's fantastic. And for me, if I were to add my 2 cents and, offline, I would love to know who this person is and connect with them because I would love to follow their journey. As a former superintendent, the actions and behaviors of the superintendent and the board of directors, that's what ripples, and that's what's talked about in the produce aisle of your grocery store.
That's right.
If something goes in a way that's not dignified,
That's right.
it's not on the dignity end of that. And so even though I know you talked about the importance of the grassroots of the student, I think the modeling at a school board meeting and putting even those words into policy and having a poster on the side of the room where the board is talking.
Exactly.
It has the dignity scale, and you say those words before public comment each and every time, and that's modeled over and over again. That's going to ripple differently throughout systems.
I think so. And the good news is, people say, "Are you going to be thought police or constraining free speech?" Something? Absolutely not. Well, the good news here is that people are starving
Right.
for a way out of this feeling of hopelessness and anger and hostility. Very few people are happy when they feel divided and completely alienated from their brothers or their family or their community or their other parts of the country. No one wants to be here. I mean, many people feel like they've no choice, but they don't like it. So they're looking for an alternative. And we always say to people, we don't. The biggest threat to free speech. I'm just going to anticipate a question. Are you telling people they can't say what they want? No. The biggest threat to free speech today is not the government. It's contempt. If I said to you guys, in the last month, have you been in a situation where you have thought something and not said it? If I ask an audience that, every hand goes up. Yes, I have.
Absolutely.
And the reason you haven't said it is because you're afraid of how you'll be treated by the other person in the room if you say it. You're afraid of the contempt and the dehumanization that will come if you ask the question the wrong way, if you say you don't agree with some conventional wisdom from your group. So we are self-censoring more than ever because of our fear of each other. If we can create settings where you don't have to worry about being treated with contempt because you ask a question, all of a sudden you get to be Michael or Peter or Tim, and you get to actually learn and grow without fear. I mean, isn't that what teachers are supposed to be aspiring for? Everybody always says that, no, there's no stupid questions, raise your hand. But kids start to learn, well, actually, there are stupid questions. There are questions you could get punished for. because they see adults saying there are questions I will get punished for. So we think this is a great tool, not just for making people feel better, but actually for opening conversation. Excuse me, for sorry, for opening dialogue and making it more healthy and uh, authentic, to bring our real questions to the conversation and our principles to the conversation in a way that doesn't make us all more hateful.
Well, this time has flown by, and I think we have just one little type of closure. And I know I read a little bit from the book A Call to Unite, and I'd like to kind of close in a final question with your book, Tim, Fully Alive, and it comes from chapter 6, and it's actually the beginning quote of the chapter from Maya Angelou. We awaken on a low plane, on a plane of defeat, beneath the level of possibility, overpowered sometimes by a general climate of hopelessness. Kind of what we just have been talking about. Promise can be viewed as unattainable, and into the morass of misery, a light shines, a light enters. Into the atmosphere of gloom and despair, day breaks, light emerges, flooding the grim meadow of misery with hope and promise, light. And the name of the chapter is called Daybreak. And the focus of the chapter is, a monumental day of July 20th, 1968, with the, Special Olympics in Soldier Field in Chicago. And I can't imagine what your mom and felt on that day. I feel like I can feel some of her feelings from that day, which is often known as daybreak. And it's a feeling of hope for the future from, I'm sure you wish sometimes that she were still alive and that could just see and feel what was started on that daybreak. And as our leaders are listening right now, I'd love to know ending with hope. So
Yeah.
you
Well, I
have such a
appreciate your.
heart of
Yeah.
hope. And so
My mom trusted her heart a lot. And you have to, if you were a mom or a sister or a brother of a person with an intellectual disability growing up in 1920 or 30 or 40. Uh, the world was brutally cruel to people with intellectual disabilities in that era. So she had to know somewhere outside of everything the world told her that all that was wrong, right? And I'd call that the soul level. That's where Maya Angelou writes. She writes at the soul level. And we all need that level. My little leadership framework is, leaders help us find our goals, our roles, and our souls. It's easy for me to remember. That's how come I use it. uh, Leaders help us set the goals so we know where we're headed. They help us know our role so we know our part in achieving the goal, but they also tap into our deepest level, our soul level. And that's what schools do at their best every day. You wake up and you think to yourself, my work matters to me at the deepest level of I know you're trapped in grading papers, and I know you're trapped in lesson plans, and I know you're trapped in trying to get technology to work and all these things. But most of us went into education because at some level, we loved kids. We wanted to help make the future better. We believed that we could make a difference. That's the soul level. And when we unleashed that level, that's what my mom did on 1968. And she trusted her soul long enough to say, I will not allow the beauty of this group of human beings to be crushed any longer. Even if it's just me and 10 other people or 500 other people, we are going to celebrate the beauty of these people. We can see it. Let the world see it with us. And now, 200 countries, 50,000 times a year, those games are run. Community and the dirt roads in Central Africa and, middle schools in urban New York and Russia and China and Syria and Lebanon. Those games are being run every day of the year. Everyone is a protest against exclusion and fear and dehumanization. Every one of them is an invitation to see our brothers and sisters with dignity and to be healers of that divide. So, I'm just obviously super proud of my mom, but I'm also super grateful to be in this work as I dare say, as an educator, I'm not in a school, but I do count myself as an educator. I try to be a leader, but most of all, I try to trust that everybody is more beautiful than we dare imagine. And if, as educators, if we can keep that central experience, that central belief with strongly in front of us, I think we can get through a lot of these difficult times we're in right now. And I know they're difficult, but if I had to bet on any group of people, I'd bet on our educators to get us through.
Tim Shriver, I mean, I'll speak on behalf of Mike. Thank you for powerful conversation, and that was a beautiful way to end the podcast. So thank you very much for being on our Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, you guys.
Well, Peter and listeners, I hope that you just enjoyed the last 30, 35 minutes of just a lesson for yourself and a lesson in leadership. Wasn't it just amazing, Peter?
It was, I have to be honest, sometimes you go into these and you're just like, okay, we're supposed to keep this at 20 minutes, or we're supposed to keep this at 25 minutes, because maybe the attention span isn't what it once was. But you can't do that when you're having such a deep conversation about so many important topics that people need to know. And that's what he did. He makes it so I mean, let's be honest here. We know his background, we know his family, we know there's just so much that can come with that name Shriver. And yet as soon as you come in and start to have a conversation with him, he's incredibly personable, and he makes you not feel, I mean, he's really the epitome of what he was talking about, which is, it's not about his status that he's bringing in, it's about giving all three of us in the conversation equal status. And I think just that alone is a really important part for people to think about. How do you, as a leader or a teacher or an instructional coach or whatever, a superintendent, whatever your position might be, how do you do what Tim just did with us? He comes in with a huge level of status, and yet he made us feel like we were all equal, because he truly believes that we're all equal. And I think that's a powerful sentiment to always make sure that we live by with whatever population we're working with, if that makes sense.
Well, no, you just described what he shared. We met, we played, we interacted, and
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
celebrated. So he really, as you just described in that 30 minutes together, we met, we played, we celebrated, and the kind of the path of what Special Olympics is, and how he could talk just fundamentally about Special Olympics, but he talked, what does Special Olympics mean for the culture of the world? It speaks of belonging, it speaks of inclusion, it speaks of dignity. That's what it speaks of. So that event on July 20th, 1968, which, he talked about the day. Well, we all know that was the event in Soldier Field, and that's where most people say that's when Special Olympics started. But we all know it was in his backyard, and his mom brought everybody to the backyard, and that's really when Special Olympics started.
Yeah.
Play day at the Shriver backyard, and that's the story. That's the story behind the story. I think most of the world thinks of what that day as daybreak, July 20th, 1968, but really there's something more, which is the soul of what he was talking about, and that his mother knew. And I think as educators and the people listening, you know you're doing good work. You're doing soul work right now. Don't give up. Just keep moving. Have hope.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of the dignity piece, I brought up losing my mom and sister, and not having the luxury to think always about politics when it comes to family, because my family is incredibly close. We just might always have different political views. And I think one of the things that you made me think of, that he made me think of too, is that idea of legacy. When it's all said and done and you're looking back, how did you treat other people who may have disagreed with you? Did you waste a lot of time scrolling social media to just get angrier about something? Or did you actually move into a space where you wanted to create deeper relationships with people, no matter who they might be. And those are the topics I think about, because I've been feeling, we're recording this around the times that the holidays are happening or just happened. And I've been feeling like, there's got to be this bigger space that we need to focus on, as opposed to getting caught up in the little things that might irritate us or the little things we disagree on. I feel like in my personal life, it's about finding the things that we agree on, because I want I want my existence to be better. I don't want to focus on all these things that I can't control. I want to focus on the things that I do. And that's been part of this conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did talk about, excuse me, the continuum of contempt and dignity. But I guess what I would like to point out is there was no contempt when you and he were talking about your mom. And
No.
so what he did was taking dignity to a new level, because if you were to play back that interview, he spent at least 30 to 60 seconds not just giving you condolences,
Mm,
but talking to you about that. And so he took it was almost like a lesson in dignity plus. So
yes.
those that we are in agreement with, and that we are, our siblings, our family, that we are in agreement. It's them. He just modeled the importance of taking a moment. He's in the middle of a podcast, and you share that, and he spent I would say it's probably a good minute
Yeah.
talking, and that was pretty amazing too.
Well, Michael, you were the one who actually brought Tim Shriver to the table and said, do you think we can get an opportunity to interview him? Because you had seen him present, like you said, during the podcast. And also he spoke to us when we were both working. You were working with WASA and I was working as a consultant with WASA. So thank you for bringing him to this moment where we could have a deeper conversation and ask him some deeper questions. As for everybody, if you enjoy the podcast, please let us know. Not only can you listen to it, but you can actually watch the video on YouTube as well if you're not watching it there. So Michael, another great interview. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. It was great, and I hope our listeners enjoyed it.